My sister told her children I was the reason our family fell apart. The letters I kept for 9 years said something completely different. My name is Mara Quinn, and I was 34. The Sunday afternoon, my niece looked across my kitchen table and told me she knew what I had done. Her name is Sophie. She was 16. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's specific way of setting her jaw when she had decided something and did not intend to be moved from it. She had come to return a book she had borrowed 3 weeks earlier. She had come alone, without her mother knowing. I had made tea and set it on the table, and she had sat down and looked at me with the expression of a teenager who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally decided to put it down in front of the person it belongs to. She said, "I know you are the reason my mom stopped talking to Grandma." She said, "I know you are the reason our family does not do holidays together anymore." She said, "I know you are the reason my mom cried for a year when I was 7. She said, "My mom told me." She said she told me everything. She looked at me with 16-year-old certainty. The specific certainty of a person who has received one version of a story from the person they love most and has not yet learned to ask for the other version. I looked at Sophie. I thought about 9 years, 108 months, 47 letters, written in my sister's handwriting, every one of them saved. Every one of them in a box in my closet behind the winter coats. Not because I had planned to use them, because I had loved my sister when she wrote them, because the letters were the truest version of her I had ever known, because I had kept them the way you keep the things that matter most to you, even when the person who gave them to you has become someone different. I said, "Sophie." She said, "Yes." I said, "I would like to show you something." She said, "Okay." I said, "It is going to take a little while." I said, "Are you in a hurry?" She said, "No." I said, "Good." I said, "Drink your tea." I went to the closet. Welcome back to 2 a.m. revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever been the villain in a story someone told their children about you, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My sister's name is Diana Quinn, and she is 4 years older than me. She is the kind of person who rewrites history the way other people redecorate rooms, not with malice at the start, with the specific human tendency to arrange the past into a shape that is livable. The problem with Diana's arrangements was that they required me to be the furniture she moved out. We grew up in a house that was not always easy. Our parents loved us. They also had a marriage that ran on a specific fuel of tension and resolution that was exhausting to live inside of, and that produced in both of us the particular vigilance of children who have learned to read the weather of a room before they enter it. Diana learned to manage the weather. She became the person who smoothed things over, who said the right thing at the right moment, who redirected conflict before it landed. She was extraordinarily good at it. It was her primary skill and her primary limitation simultaneously, because the same capacity that allowed her to smooth over external conflict made her unable to tolerate internal conflict. She could not sit with the uncomfortable truth of a situation. She needed the story to be clean, and when reality was not clean, she cleaned it, by revising it, by choosing which version to tell, by deciding over time that the version she told was the version that had happened. I watched this happen across 30 years of being her sister. I watched her revise small things first. A disagreement at school that became a story where she was entirely innocent. A conflict with a friend that became a story where the friend was entirely at fault. A misunderstanding with our mother that became a story where our mother had been unreasonable. Small things, then larger ones, then the largest one, the one she told her children, the one about me. The family falling apart happened over 18 months when I was 21 and Diana was 25. I want to be accurate about this because accuracy is the only thing that matters in this story. Our parents' marriage had been deteriorating for years. The tension that had always been present had become something more specific in the year I turned 20, more frequent, more visible, less managed by the usual mechanisms. I was the one who said something, not to our parents together, to our mother, alone, in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. I said I was worried about her. I said what I was seeing scared me. I said I thought she should talk to someone, not leave, not fight. Talk to someone. Our mother was not ready to hear it. She received it as an intrusion. She said things to Diana that she should not have said. Diana, who had always been the one our mother called, received our mother's version of the Sunday conversation and built her own version from it. Her version was that I had interfered, that I had destabilized things, that what had been manageable before my conversation had become unmanageable after it. She called me that week. Her voice was the specific version I recognized as the weather smoothing register, the one she used when she had decided on a narrative and was delivering it rather than discussing it. She said I should not have said anything. She said I had made things worse. She said Mom was devastated. I said Mom had needed someone to say something. She said it was not my place. I said I was her daughter. She said you made it worse. We went around that specific circle 4 times. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said, you always do this. You always have to be the one who says the difficult thing. You always have to be right. I said, I am not trying to be right. I said, I am trying to be honest. She said, they are not the same thing. She said, not to everyone. She hung up. That was 9 years ago. That was where the story she told her children began. I want to tell you what happened after, because the story Diana told her children ended with me as the reason, and the truth was more complicated than a reason. Our parents separated 8 months after my conversation with our mother, not because of the conversation, because of everything that had been building for years, and that the conversation had named but had not caused. They separated, and then they reconciled, and then they separated again in the way of marriages that have been straining for a long time. During those 8 months, Diana and I barely spoke. She managed the family situation from her position as the one who smoothed things over. She coordinated between our parents. She mediated. She held things together with the specific competence she had always had. And she told herself, and eventually told others, that things had been manageable before I spoke. That was not true. But it was the story that made her role make sense. If I had broken something she had been keeping whole, then her 9 years of smoothing were not futile. They were heroic. She needed that. I understood at 34 why she needed it. I had not understood it at 21. At 21, I had just been her sister. At 34, I was a family therapist. I understood what it cost someone to hold a story for 9 years. I also understood what it cost the people the story was about. The letters started arriving 2 months after our fight. The first one came on a Tuesday, a plain envelope, my name in Diana's handwriting. I opened it expecting more of the conversation we had been having on the phone, the version delivered, the narrative repeated. But it was not that. It was an apology, not a complete one, not a clean one, the messy kind, the kind that says, I'm sorry for some of this, but not all of it, and I do not yet know which parts are which. She said she had been thinking about what I had said to Mom. She said she was still not sure I had been right to say it. She said she had been angry. She said she was still angry, but she said she knew I had done it from love. She said she knew I was worried about Mom. She said she was worried too. She said she just handled worry differently. She said she was sorry for the phone call. She said she missed her sister. I read it 3 times. I put it in a box. I wrote back. We wrote letters for 9 years, not exclusively. We saw each other, we talked. But the letters were the parallel conversation, the one that ran underneath the spoken one, and that said the things that were harder to say in person. Diana wrote the way she couldn't speak. In the letters she was more honest than she was in any room I ever shared with her. She wrote about our parents, about the marriage and what it had been like to grow up inside it and what it had cost her to be the one who managed it. She wrote about the separation and what she had felt and what she had done and what she wished she had done differently. She wrote about me. She wrote about our argument. She wrote, in year 3, in a letter I have read more times than any other, that she knew I had not broken the family. She wrote that she had told herself a story that made it easier to be angry with me because being angry with me was easier than being angry with what had actually happened. She wrote that she was sorry for the story she had been telling. She wrote that I had done the right thing on that Sunday afternoon. She wrote that our mother had needed someone to say something. She wrote that she was glad I had been the one to say it. That letter arrived in year 3. I kept it. I kept all of them, 47 letters over 9 years, in a box in my closet behind the winter coats. The letters stopped in year 6, not because of a fight, because Diana met someone. She remarried. She had her second child. Her life reorganized itself around the new center of a family she was building, and the letters that had been the space for the harder conversation no longer had a place in the new rhythm. I understood. I missed them. I kept the box. In year 7, I started noticing things, small things at first. The way Sophie looked at me at family events, not with the warmth she had always had, with a specific evaluating quality, the assessment look, the look of a child who has been told something about a person and is checking it against the person they see. I noted it. I said nothing. In year 8, my cousin Dana told me she had been at a birthday party for Sophie and that my name had come up. She said Diana had said something about me. She said Diana had said the family had gone through a difficult period because of some choices I had made. She said Diana had said it with the specific authority of a woman delivering a known fact. I thought about year 3. I know I had not broken the family. I had been telling myself a story. I am sorry. She had written it in her own handwriting in year 3. And in year 8, she was telling her daughter's birthday party that the family's difficult period was because of my choices. I went home that evening. I went to the closet. I took out the box. I read every letter in order. Then I put them back. I did not do anything with them. I was not ready. I was waiting for the right moment. The right moment arrived on a Sunday afternoon when Sophie sat at my kitchen table with her mother's eyes and her mother's jaw and said, "I know what you did. If you have ever been the villain in a story told to the next generation while you were sitting on the proof that said otherwise, stay with me and subscribe, because what happened when Sophie read her mother's letters is the reason this story does not end with a 16-year-old girl believing something false about her aunt." I came back from the closet with the box. I set it on the kitchen table. Sophie looked at it. I said, "These are letters your mother wrote me." She said, "What kind of letters?" I said, "The kind people write when they are trying to be honest about something." She said, "My mom wrote you letters." I said, "For 9 years." She looked at the box. She said, "How many?" I said, 47. Sophie looked at the number on my face. She said she had not known. I said, "I know?" I said, "I want to read you some of them." I said, "Not all of them." I said, "The parts that belong to this conversation." I said, "The rest belongs to your mother and to me." She said, "Okay." She wrapped her hands around her tea. She was 16. She was about to understand something about her mother that no 16-year-old is entirely ready to understand. I was a family therapist. I knew how to hold a space for that kind of understanding. I was going to hold it carefully. I took the first letter out. I read her 4 letters. The first was from month 2, the one where Diana said she was angry, but she knew I had acted from love. Sophie listened. Her hand stayed wrapped around the tea. The second was from year 2, the one where Diana talked about what it had cost her to be the family manager, the one where she said she understood, finally, why I had said something. Sophie set her tea down. The third was from year 3, The one where Diana wrote, "I know I had not broken the family. I had been telling myself a story that made it easier to be angry with you." I said the next line slowly. I said, "I am sorry for the story I had been telling." Sophie looked at the letter. She said, "Is that her handwriting?" I said, "Yes." She picked it up. She read it herself. She read it twice. She set it down very carefully. The fourth was from year 4, shorter than the others. Diana writing about a holiday we had managed to get through together and what it had meant to her. She had written, "You are the only person in my life who tells me the truth, even when I do not want to hear it." She had written, "I know I make that difficult." She had written, "I am working on it." Sophie read all 4. She read some of them twice. She looked at the box. She said, "There are 47 of these." I said, "Yes." She said she wrote them for 9 years. I said, "Yes." She said, "She told me." She stopped. She picked up the year 3 letter again. She read the line again. "I know I had not broken the family. I had been telling myself a story." She put the letter down. She said, "She told me you were the reason." I said, "I know." She said, "She told me you made choices that hurt everyone." I said, "I know." She said, "But she wrote this." I said, "Yes." She said, "In year 3. I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. The afternoon light was coming through my kitchen window. Sophie sat in it and held the year 3 letter and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Why did she tell me something different?" I sat with that question. It was the right question. It was the question a 16-year-old deserved an honest answer to. I said, "I think your mother has always found it easier to hold a story together than to sit with the complicated truth." I said, "I think when she told you about the family, she told you the version that made sense of everything." I said, "I do not think she meant to lie to you." I said, "I think the story she told you is the story she has been telling herself." I said, "I think she has been telling it so long, she has forgotten writing the other version." Sophie looked at the box. She said, "You kept all of them." I said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" I thought about it. I said, "Because they were the most honest version of your mother I ever knew." I said, "Because I loved her when she wrote them." I said, "Because I thought someday the honest version and the told version would need to meet each other." Sophie picked up the year 3 letter one more time. She read, "I am sorry for the story I had been telling." She set it down. She said, "What do I do with this?" I said, "That is up to you." I said, "You do not have to do anything today." I said, "This is a lot to hold." She said she needed to think. I said, "Of course." I said, "Sophie." She looked at me. I said, "Your mother loves you." She said, "I know." I said, "What she told you came from the version she needed to believe." I said, "It does not mean she does not love you." I said, "It means she is human." Sophie looked at the letters. She said, "Are you going to talk to her?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I think it is time." She said, "She is going to know I came here." I said, "Yes." She said, "She is going to be upset." I said, "Probably." I said, "Are you okay with that?" Sophie sat with that, 16 years old, her mother's eyes, her own jaw now, not the set one, the one doing its own thinking. She said, "Yes." She said she is okay with that. She said she would rather know the truth. I said, "I know." I said, "You are very like your mother in the ways that matter." Sophie looked at me. She said, "That is the nicest thing you could have said." I said, "I know." I said, "I meant it." I called Diana that evening, not to fight, to ask. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was the managed version. She had already received a text from Sophie. She knew Sophie had been to see me. She said, "Mara." I said, "Diana?" She said, "What did you say to her?" I said, "I showed her some of your letters." The line was very quiet. She said, "Which ones?" I said, "The ones that were relevant." She said, "You should not have done that." I said, "I disagree." She said, "She is 16. I said, "She came to me with a version of our family history that was not accurate." I said, "I could not let her keep it." Diana said nothing. I said, "Diana?" She said, "Yes." I said, I have 47 letters. She said, I know. I said, 9 years of them. She said, I know. I said, I have the one from year 3. She was quiet. I said, I think you know which one I mean. She said, yes. She said she knew. I said, I am not calling to use them against you. I said, I am calling because Sophie deserves the truth about her family. She said, the truth is complicated. I said, I know. I said, I am a family therapist. I said, I specialize in complicated. She said, Mara. I said, yes. She said, I have been telling that story for 9 years. I said, I know. She said, it became the story. I said, I know how that happens. She said, what do you want from me? I said, the same thing I wanted 9 years ago. I said, I want you to be honest. She said, with Sophie. I said, with Sophie. I said, and with yourself. She was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that means someone is doing something difficult inside a phone call. Then she said, I do not know how to do that. I said, I will help you. She said, you would do that. I said, yes. She said, after 9 years of... She stopped. She said, after everything. I said, yes. I said, you are my sister. I said, I have 47 letters that tell me who you are when you are not protecting yourself. I said, I would like to know that person again. Diana was quiet. Then she said, okay. I said, okay. She said, it will be hard. I said, I know. She said, Sophie is going to ask me questions. I said, yes. She said, I do not know all the answers. I said, that is okay. I said, honest and incomplete is better than complete and false. She said, that sounds like something I would have written in a letter. I said, it sounds like something you did write in a letter. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, the sound adjacent to one, the one that comes when something is both painful and recognizable. She said, okay, Mara. She said, okay. I said, come Sunday. I said, bring Sophie if she wants to come. I said, we will have tea. She said, okay. She said, Sunday. She said, Mara. I said, yes. She said, I am sorry. She said, for the story. She said, for 9 years of it. I said, I know. I said, I kept the letters. She said, I know. She said, I am glad you did. I said, me too. Diana came on Sunday. She came alone. Sophie stayed home. Not because she did not want to come, because Diana had asked for this one conversation first. She had called Sophie on Saturday evening, and she had told her she was going to talk to me, and she had told her she was going to try to be honest. Sophie had said, okay. She had said, Mom. Diana had said, yes. She had said, I read what you wrote in year 3. Diana had said, I know. Sophie had said, I understand some things better now. Diana had said, I am glad. Sophie had said, I love you, Mom. Diana had said, I love you too. She had said, I am going to try to do better. Sophie had said, that is all I need. Diana told me this at my kitchen table on Sunday. She told me with the expression of a woman who has done something difficult and is still processing the difficulty. She said, Sophie forgave me. I said, I know she did. She said, how did you know? I said, because she is your daughter. She said, I do not deserve that. I said, probably not. I said, you are getting it anyway. She looked at the box on the counter. I had left it out. She said, can I read them? I said, all of them. She said, yes. I said, yes. I slid the box across the table. She opened it. She took out the first letter. Year 1. Her own handwriting. She read it. Her face did something complicated. She turned to year 2. She read, I made more tea. I watched the afternoon light move across the kitchen window. Diana read for 40 minutes, all 47. When she finished, she closed the box. She put her hands flat on the top of it. She said, I forgot I wrote these. I said, I know. She said, I forgot who I was when I wrote them. I said, I know. She said, this person, she looked at the box. She said, this person knew the truth. I said, yes. She said, and I spent 9 years telling a different story. I said, yes. She said, to my children. I said, yes. She said, God. I said, yes. She was quiet. Then she said, what do we do now? I said, we do what you said in year 4. She looked at me. I said, we are honest. I said, even when it is difficult. She said, especially when it is difficult. I said, yes. I said, especially then. She said, I am going to need help with that. I said, I know. I said, I am a family therapist. She said, yes. She said, I know. She said, would you? I said, yes. She said, you do not know what I was going to ask. I said, you were going to ask if I would help you talk to your children. She said, yes. I said, yes. She said, okay. She said, Sunday. I said, Sunday. She said, I want to bring Sophie. I said, bring Sophie. She said, and the boys? I said, bring everyone. She put her hand on the box. She said, you kept 47 letters. I said, yes. She said, for 9 years. I said, yes. She said, even when I was telling everyone. I said, yes. She said, why? I thought about it. I said, because I knew who you were when you wrote them. I said, I was keeping them for her. I said, the person who wrote these. I said I was keeping them until she came back. Diana looked at the box. Then she looked at me. She said, here I am. I said, yes. I said, here you are. Diana started therapy 6 weeks later. Not with me. With a colleague I trusted. She went every week. She called me after most sessions. Not to report, to process. The calls were different from the ones we had been having. Less managed, less delivered. More the way the letters had been. More honest, more complicated, more her. Sophie started coming to Sunday tea, not every week, some weeks. The weeks when she wanted to. She asked me questions about the family, about the things her mother had told her, about what I remembered. I answered honestly. I said some things I knew certainly. I said some things were complicated. I said some things I could only tell her from my perspective. I said there were things only her mother knew. I said she should ask her mother those things. She did. Diana answered, imperfectly, honestly. The two things are not mutually exclusive. The box is on my bookshelf now, not in the closet, on the shelf. Between my professional books and the photograph of our parents from the year before, everything got complicated. I look at it sometimes. 47 letters, 9 years, my sister's handwriting, the honest version. I kept them because they were true. I kept them because the people we are in our most honest moments deserve to be remembered. I kept them because I knew that the person who wrote I know I had not broken the family was still in there somewhere, even when the person delivering the other version had forgotten she existed. She came back. It took 9 years. She came back. Some things are worth the wait. Some things are worth the 47 letters. That is my story. 9 years. 47 letters. A Sunday afternoon with a 16-year-old girl who deserved the truth and an aunt who had been keeping it in a box behind the winter coats. If someone has been telling a story about you that is not true, keep the record of what is, not to use as a weapon, to hold the truth in a form that survives time, because the honest version of a person is always there somewhere, written down, waiting, for the right Sunday afternoon, for the right kitchen table, for the person who kept it to be ready to share it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.